How's it going, guys? Tonight we're going deep into the subject of plant medicine and psychedelics, something that obviously is pretty central to my existence. I became interested in psychedelics at a very young age through a chance encounter with a book that was accidentally introduced into the elementary school library called Flowering Plants. And it was full of folklore about ayahuasca and mandrake and the effects, and it really just resonated deeply with me. You know, I knew that it was something that was going to be important in my life, and within, I guess, 2 or 3 years, I had read the Psychedelics Encyclopedia 3 times, by like 8th grade or something. I got into Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, Terence McKenna, Aldous Huxley really early on, Joseph Campbell, the great Harvard mythologist. And I really can say that I think I owe everything really to psychedelics, because I came up in extreme poverty, surrounded by violence. My mother was mentally ill and very abusive, and my wasn't really my father, but father figure was a broken man with alcohol and drug problems, and it's almost like I intuited that I was going to need psychedelics to pull me up out of that abyss that I was born into. And it sort of had the dual effect of sort of addressing and satisfying my primary interest. It's like I came out of the womb obsessed with metaphysics, basically. And, obviously they're a tremendous tool for that type of development as well. And so the importance of these things and the potential and the utility of them cannot really be overstated. The reality is, though, that it requires a very sophisticated operator to get the most out of it. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know why you're doing what you're doing. Your heart has to be in the right place. Your head has to be in the right place. And one of the reasons for this stream is that over the last couple of years, I don't want to say that I became cynical exactly, but the widespread use of ayahuasca, for example, has not necessarily had the impact that I was expecting, that I would have thought. And I really do feel like the train has kind of gone off the tracks to an extent. There are a lot of unfortunate influences, from profit motive to New Age spirituality, pressure for herd conformity, and really just a lack of understanding in regards to what is really required of a person to navigate consciousness effectively, to maintain balance and to open the mind without abandoning critical thinking and solid reasoning, which is something that's probably the fundamental issue that we have, that people don't have the structure, they don't have the guidance, and we're also coming from a culture that has a very skewed perception of spirituality and sort of lacks context, I guess. In the mystery traditions, which are a shamanic tradition, the initiate was led through a series of experiences that catalyzed certain processes that prepared them for these experiences and sort of set the stage, it helped them to engineer themselves in a way that was sufficiently preparatory, and the initiate was required to study mathematics, to study geometry, to study philosophy, to study music, and deeply, you know? So what I'm getting at here is that psychedelics hold just as much promise as people like Timothy Leary and Terrence McKenna and, you know, everyone smart that's ever tried them, basically. But without the proper context, they're potentially doing more harm than good, you know? And we're going to get deeply into all of that. Let me check in with the chat, make sure audio's good. And by the way, this isn't AMA, so if you guys have questions or subjects you would like me to elucidate upon for your edification and amusement, pop them in the chat and I'll happily discuss it. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the history, how this all came about. You know, a lot of people, conspiracy theorist types, have this opinion that the CIA actually created the psychedelic movement, that Timothy Leary was an agent and Jerry Garcia was an Illuminati puppet and all of this kind of crazy stuff. And it's really interesting to me because a lot of those people believe in God. And when they see the incredible coincidences that occurred in order for the psychedelic movement to take off, they don't attribute it to the hand of God. They say, oh, the CIA must have done it. You know, that's why there's all these weird coincidences. Clearly, it was a conspiracy. First of all, deprogramming all of their propaganda is not on their agenda, you know. And furthermore, when they were banned, the researchers, including Humphrey Osmond, they didn't tell the United States government, you know, these are dangerous, terrible things, we need to ban them and restrict access. They said, Humphrey Osmond in particular said something along the lines of, it's unprecedented in the history of psychiatry that any compound can cure so many psychological conditions and oftentimes with a single dose. And the government response was to go and shut them down. You know, so, you know, before we get into all of the crazy synchronicities and how the psychedelic movement actually started, I just wanted to preface it with that, you know, it was not the CIA. They were involved in a way. They did covertly fund Wasson, but he didn't know he was getting money from the CIA. They set up a dummy organization. So some of these things there is like some truth to, as we'll see with Tim Leary as well. But not like people think. So a lot of you guys are probably, you know, vaguely aware of this history, but Timothy Leary, actually Gordon Wasson, let's start with Gordon Wasson. Gordon Wasson was, I believe, a banker, definitely a wealthy, you know, elite type of person. And he and his wife, God, what was her name? Gordon and his wife, I can't remember. They were interested in mushrooms just as like hobbyist mycologists, but really serious. And they first noticed Amanita muscaria and the sungus, which is actually where we get the word shaman, the saman. Mircea Eliade adopted it from the sungus, saman. But at any rate, somehow that led them to an awareness that there was a mushroom in Mexico that was worshipped by the indigenous, the Mazatec. And they got really curious about this, so they went down and they found a woman named Maria Sabina. Maria Sabina was a curandera, and just as in the Western mystery tradition, there is a strict policy of secrecy in every magical tradition that I'm aware of. And Maria, and this is interesting because it was around the same time that Israel Regardie and a lot of other adepts of the Western mysteries also decided it was time to end the silence and just share the knowledge with anyone who was interested. And Maria sensed that the world was going into a dark place, and she knew the power of the mushrooms to heal, and so she decided to give them to Gordon. And I don't remember the exact number, but the dose that she gave him was insane. It was massive. So trying to imagine Gordon Wasson coming from this, like, you know, wealthy banker, straight 1950s kind of world, and getting hit with that, it's pretty incredible. In the end, however, Gordon betrayed Maria and destroyed her life. So that's not cool. She asked him not to expose her, and not to use her name in his, you know, research papers or whatever. And he did. And hippies started flooding to the town. And the Mazatec got really mad at Maria. I think they burned her house down. She was ostracized, died penniless. The fact that Wasson didn't even give her any money after he caused her all this trouble just blows my mind. You know, and I only found out about this a few years ago. You know, worth noting while we're on the subject that it just goes to show people that believe all you have to do is take psychedelics and you're suddenly a saint, you know, and I'm exaggerating, but you guys know what I mean. It's just not the case. And we'll get into how to determine what kind of effects they have on you. You know, if Wasson had been doing this with the right intention, with the right guidance, things may have turned out differently. You know, and I'm not blaming Maria because she didn't speak English. I don't think she even spoke Spanish, just Mazatec. So she could only provide songs, and it is true that there's a tremendous transference of consciousness and information that can occur even wordlessly with music to a high degree of specificity. But there was no possibility for her to help him with integration. There was no, you know what I mean? She could not communicate with him. So yeah, that didn't turn out great. But we did get a hold of the mushrooms. And so a few years before that, a man named Albert Hoffman was messing around in his laboratory, and that's, you know, a ridiculous way to put it. He was synthesizing different, what do you call them, analogs of, or different, they're not analogs, they're just lysergic acid variations, right? There was like 50 of them or something. One of them, lysergic acid diethylamide tartrate 25, the 25th in the sequence that he synthesized, didn't seem to do anything. It dilated the eyes of the rats he gave it to, and their blood pressure changed a little bit, heart rate increased a tiny bit, but he didn't really notice anything significant. And he was actually looking for vasoconstrictors to help with migraine headaches and bleeding during pregnancy. And so ergot fungus, by the way, if you take it without processing it, you'll go insane. And the poisoning symptoms are very similar to mercury poisoning. So it's a very terrible way to die. And we'll get to why I disagree with Hoffman in regards to what was in the Kaikion of the Eleusinian Mysteries eventually. But for now, let's just leave that there. But anyways, it didn't have much effect on anything, so he put it on a shelf for 5 years. In 1943, April 19th, he accidentally ingested some. And now I have to give a biscuit, a cookie, to the conspiracy theorists here, because this actually doesn't make any sense. LSD does not absorb through your skin, only through eye, nose, you know, thin membranes, vaginal walls, but not through your skin. So this claim that he just spilled some on his hand does not hold water. And by the way, all those stories the boomers told us about people taping sheets to their chest and it soaking in and they think they're an orange juice glass or whatever, those aren't real either. So it's a bit odd, and it is possible that he got some on his hand and rubbed his eye, or, you know, I don't know. But that part of the story is a little bit suspicious. At any rate, he goes bicycling home, and he starts tripping. And he described them as phantasmagoric phantasms of fractal. I mean, it's really great. You should read the book. LSD my problem child. And, after throwing that cookie to the conspiracy theorists, I should say of Hoffman that from my perception, he was a sweet, gentle, kind person. And he actually said that he felt that LSD chose him, that it was conscious and aware. It was like a spirit, and it picked him. He lived to, I think, 111, and he was still doing Tai Chi at 100. I used to have a picture of him where he was holding a mushroom and he was in a Tai Chi stance. So he went back to the lab and ingested some on purpose. And this time it was a lot more, I think 250 micrograms. And you have to remember that there was no psychoactive chemical on Earth, or even medically active, I don't think, at the microgram range like that. So he thought he was taking a tiny amount. So this time he trips bisols. He calls the doctor. He's like, help me, I'm dying. And the doctor's like, no, you're not. Your heart rate's a little up. Blood pressure's, different, but you're fine. And so that was the beginning of it, right? So remember what I was saying about Gordon Wasson. That was in, I think, 1953 or something when he found Maria Sabina. So enter Timothy Leary. Tim Leary was a Harvard psychologist. He had gone through some difficulties. His wife unalived herself, and he took his kids to France, and he got very, very sick in a very weird way. And that kind of plays into the development of a shaman. This is like typical archetypal process. And so he goes back to the United States and gets a job at Harvard, and one of his colleagues says, I heard about this mushroom in Mexico and blah, blah, blah. And Leary's like, all right, well, let's rent a mansion down there in Cuernavaca and bring some, other psychologists with us and find these mushrooms. So they go down there. I don't know if it was Maria Sabina. I don't think so. In fact, I know it wasn't. They went to Cuernavaca. And they found the mushrooms, and they went back and ate them. And, Tim Leary is 53 years old the first time he trips. So this is a tremendous revelation. And Timothy Leary had an IQ of at least 160. So he was, beyond genius level. And he recognized the potential of the psychedelic experience instantly, right? So he goes back to Harvard, and he's just flipping. Him and Dick Albert, who eventually became Ram Dass. And Leary wanted to turn on the whole planet. He's like, every single person on Earth needs to experience this. It will fix our existential crisis. It will end war. All of the baggage that our ancestors have saddled us with, and, we can fix everything with this. And somehow Hoffman found out that he had this, that may not even be true. Sorry, it's been a long time since I've read this, but I think what actually happened is that it was just a coincidence that Hoffman thought, okay, I have this weird compound that does this crazy thing to your mind. Who do you send it to? Somebody at Harvard. So Leary gets back from the mushroom thing, and the LSD arrives shortly after from Hoffman's lab. And so he eats this himself. And, that's basically how it all started. But part of what I'm trying to outline here is that, Hoffman ingesting it and Gordon Wasson discovering this thing and the timing of Leary. And, and then because of this connection with Leary and Hoffman, Wasson sends the mushroom to Hoffman. And so now Albert Hoffman becomes the first person to isolate psilocybin from the mushrooms, and he also sends these psilocybin pills to Leary at Harvard. So Leary starts gathering college students, grad students to have weird experiments with, and he goes to a prison and doses the inmates. And the recidivism rate did fall from 77% to 11% with the study group. I believe those are the numbers. So here's a little crazy synchronistic, another anecdote to this. By the way, if you guys want the more coherent version of this and the full detail, High Priest by Timothy Leary is an excellent book that tells the whole story. So Leary somehow hears about ayahuasca at some point during all this. And ayahuasca is pretty much totally unknown. The only person that really knew anything about it was Richard Evans Schultes. He was a also Harvard, but before Leary's time, ethnobotanist. And he went to the Amazon and was given ayahuasca by tribes. And there's an excellent book called One River by a student, Wade Davis, about his adventures. He got lost in the jungle for years and years and years. And when he finally came out, he was dragging this wooden, that had planks to slide it. And he had thousands and thousands of unknown species, including the blue orchid, which is an incredibly tiny little blue orchid. He would keep peyote buttons by the door of his classroom, and his students could take some home and eat them and write a paper for extra credit or whatever. So anyways, somehow Leary finds out about ayahuasca. Yahe, they were calling it. And William S. Burroughs, who is the inspiration for the entire beatnik movement, basically. There's a book by Jack Kerouac called On the Road. And Neil Cassidy, who ended up driving the Further bus with the Grateful Dead and the Ken Kesey crew and the acid test and all that stuff, he was a character in the book they were all real people. And Old Bull Lee in the book is William S. Burroughs. Before he was famous, before he was a writer. And somehow he had found out about Yahe, and he wanted to go to South America and find it. So Leary goes into a little bar, it's probably an overstatement, a canteen or whatever, on the Amazon River somewhere in the middle of nowhere, right? And he goes in and sits down next to this super tall white dude, William S. Burroughs, and Timothy Leary, randomly in the same little shack, looking for ayahuasca, both of them. Almost not relevant, but I just wanted to share it because the story of how all this developed is full of stuff like that. And that signifies to me a certain type of significance to the whole trajectory of the evolutionary paradigm, super interesting if nothing else. So at any rate, where are we in this tale? Tim Leary, Aldous Huxley, and a few other intellectuals started gathering to try to decide what to do with these compounds and with this news. Leary was of the opinion that we need to turn on the whole world. Turn on, tune in, drop out, and take over, right? Most of you probably never heard the take over part, but that was the entire phrase. It was 4 parts. Tune in, turn on, drop out, and take over. So that was modified eventually. But they had these meetings, and Leary said that Aldous Huxley would sit up. He would just sit there with his eyes closed and his arms crossed, and then he would sit up and make a Diamond Pure comment and then fold back up into his meditation. And if you guys know anything about Huxley, trying to imagine these conversations between Leary and Huxley and whoever else was there, I mean, to be a fly on the wall, And actually, Huxley had gone to England to take mescaline with Aleister Crowley and stayed with him for 2 weeks, and no one knows what happened there. There's no writings about it from either one of them. It's total mystery what went down. So anyways, Leary says, we got to tell the world. Huxley says, no, keep this quiet. We need to disseminate it amongst the artists and musicians and, politicians, and you don't want to do this, Leary. It's going to cause huge problems. Of course, Leary did. He was a Harvard psychologist, so he could call press conferences. and he was a doctor, and it's the early 1960s. And so you have, TV was still black and white, and you have this Harvard psychologist suddenly on the news being interviewed, telling people that they should turn on with their kids instead of judging them. You don't understand what they're doing, so you should find out what they're doing and join them. And it was crazy. You can find the old interviews on YouTube. And it was wild to watch Leary trying to explain to the straight world what psychedelics were, what they could do, why they needed them. And of course, it didn't end well for him to an extent. Nixon branded him the most dangerous man in the world, and he decided he was going to run for governor of California. So, according to Leary, and I believe him because he wasn't dumb enough to be a target like that and drive around with pot in his car. They planted 2 joints on him, and he was sentenced to, I think, 60 years for the 2 joints in California, right? Unheard of. They put him in a cell with Charles Manson, thinking that would somehow be bad for him, and Manson, of course, loved him and took care of him. And Leary was eventually broken out of prison by the Weatherman Underground. They dropped a ladder from a helicopter, and under fire at like 60-something, they lifted him out of the prison, and he ran away to Africa, where he was eventually caught by the CIA, sent back to California. And this is where the reputation as a CIA agent comes from. He did give information to the police in order to get himself out of prison, but he played the cops like fools. He only gave them information that was completely useless, and no charges were filed against anyone as a result of the information that Leary gave the cops. So yes, he snitched, but he didn't actually snitch. And they actually changed police protocol because of this, so that you do not get out of trouble until there are prosecutions from the information you've given. So you guys know the rest of the story. Woodstock, the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead sound man, Owsley Stanley, made most of the LSD that was consumed in the 1960s. And this guy was something else. They busted him before LSD was illegal. So he sued to get his LSD lab back from the cops and won. When they finally did arrest him, he had been chased by federal cops so many times that they had crashed 13 cars on his motorcycle before they actually caught him. So how many times do you think they chased him? He designed the wall of sound for the Grateful Dead. He came up with active pickups for guitars and bass, designed the first hum-canceling microphones. The guy was a monster, an absolute beast of a person. Check this out, too. Speaking of crazy synchronicities, he went to Australia because he believed there was going to be a pole shift and the Earth was going to flip over and he didn't want to drown. When he got to Australia after 2 years, I think, he flipped his truck and drowned it upside down in a mud puddle. Exactly what he was trying to avoid became his fate. And so this revolution in consciousness, right? We have a bunch of boomers that have no idea what they're doing. No one has any experience. Nobody knows anything about any of this stuff, right? So then you also have the maleficent influence of the CIA. They start flooding the hippie movement with meth and all kinds of bad drugs. They have agent provocateurs infiltrating everything. And basically, almost as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. And the 70s and 80s, they basically just fattened up the sheep, kept them content, and the hippies basically forgot what they were doing, got their 3-car garages, and just went back to sleep. And then they kind of developed this attitude towards psychedelics, that it was a ruse, that it was a farce, that they didn't really do what they thought that they did in the first place. It didn't occur to them that they just didn't have the navigational skills to maximize their investitures, And so, really, the only thing that kept the psychedelic movement alive on any kind of meaningful scale through the 70s, 80s, and 90s was the Grateful Dead. They were a massive. It's for people that weren't there. It's hard to comprehend. You know, there would be football stadiums packed so full that people would be passed out with nowhere to fall down, and there would be another 20 to 40,000 people outside. And so, you know, almost the entire audience is on LSD. Half the time, the band's on LSD, and there was a lot more to it than just getting high and playing music. There was an exchange of gnosis-inducing energy that really, I think, was almost like a rock tumbler for human souls. We're not going to get too deeply into that right now. Super interesting subject, but suffice it to say that if they hadn't been carrying that torch, it would have just disappeared. So props to the Grateful Dead for holding it down all those years until enough people had been affected and understood the potential so that Jerry could go home and the psychedelic renaissance could begin again, which is what happened basically in the early 2000s, right? So we had a lot of hope again. It was the 1960s all over again. We were going to jam band festivals, and people were, you know, the cops were getting cooler and cooler. It seemed like the right-wingers were taking acid with hippies, and we all seemed to understand the political farce in the United States and, you know, the best aspects of progressive ideology or whatever was being, you know, pretty much universally accepted. And it looked really good, you know, just like Jerry Garcia said in like 1967, he was like, we thought that we had won, you know, the first year, we're like, it's over. You know, this consciousness is going to spread like wildfire, and it's done. The old paradigm is done. By 1970, he knew otherwise. And that's kind of what happened to me, you know, in the early 2000s, late 90s. It really looked like we were going to just steamroll the old paradigm, the old guard. And, you know, and that momentum did maintain for a while. You know, I don't think it was until 2020 really, or shortly before then, that the division bell started ringing so hard that people's ears are splitting. And basically, here we are in this moment, confronted with probably the greatest existential crisis in the history of mankind, a moment swollen with potential beyond our wildest dreams, but also in the shadow of impending doom. And once again, you know, psychedelics remain one of our most powerful tools, the antidote to the atom bomb, a way that we can dissolve the mind-forged manacles of culture and personal trauma, develop our cognition, enhance our intuition, enhance our creativity, bring our emotional and intellectual being into homeostasis. And then we can avail ourselves of all these technological gifts and potential that is emerging in the modern world. You know, people see AI, a lot of them, as a threat, and a lot of other elements in the world right now that I think are not threats to anyone except for the elite. And I'm trying to choose my words carefully right now because I don't want to be overly, you know, I'm not naive at this point. I realize what we're up against. But I do think that we have the potential to have an impact and make a change. And I also think I know where a lot of those keys lie. I know where a lot of the mistakes are being made, in regards to the psychedelic culture and the application of plant medicine. Steering us out of that will be tricky. And one of our biggest issues right now is that whatever we're going to do, we have to do it very rapidly and concisely, or it's going to be of no avail. So let me check in with the chat, because I really didn't mean to go on that much of a history rant, but I did, and so here we are. What are your thoughts on dissociatives like ketamine, PCP, ephedrine, etc.? Well, they're definitely not the same. I smoked PCP a few times when I was in high school, and it's kind of like mixing acid with huffing paint or something. You know, I definitely wouldn't recommend it. Not really mind expanding. It's just a drug. You know, it's just a drug. Ketamine, however, is extremely interesting, and it's actually not unnatural, as we thought. It was discovered in a mushroom, and not an analog. It's the same molecule, ketamine, in a mushroom. So, you know, for those of you that matters to, you know, that's the thing. It's actually not necessarily synthetic. Well, I mean, it's going to be synthetic if you get your hands on it, but you know what I mean. It does exist in nature. The thing about ketamine, and the reason it's important, is that if you have certain types of conditions like PTSD, extreme anxiety, you know, schizophrenia, drugs like LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, they can trigger psychotic episodes and, you know, psychotic breaks and severe anxiety attacks and all sorts of things for people that are predisposed to that. Ketamine will not do that. So one of the most important things about it is just that fact that it is there to address problems that these other psychedelics could be too problematic to have efficacy there. So I'll give you an example. A friend of a friend had severe trauma and PTSD and anxiety attacks, like literally every 15 to 45 minutes. So bad that, you know, her life was unlivable. She was constantly considering unaliving herself, and it was just an absolute nightmare. And she decided to take a massive dose of ketamine, and she said that she went into this space of clear, you know, like light, I guess. And there were these puzzle pieces everywhere that she understood to be her fractured psyche. And she knew that if she assembled them correctly, that she would not have any more anxiety attacks. And when she came out of it, it was true. She never had another anxiety attack. So ketamine is extremely important for that. Also, ketamine has played a tremendous role in the paradigm shift in our understanding of consciousness. Well, the understanding of consciousness that is going to result in a paradigm shift, or already has, and people haven't caught on. I don't really know how to put it. You know, the paradigm shift has already occurred. The mainstream has no clue, you know. But ketamine is one of the things that caused it. And the reason is that Stuart Hameroff, who's an anesthesiologist that works with Roger Penrose, they've developed well, actually, I think Auric theory came from Penrose first, and now Hameroff has kind of joined, so I shouldn't say they created it together, but that's what's happening now, you know. At any rate, he's an anesthesiologist, and he observed somehow that nitrous and ketamine actually interrupt awareness. They turn our consciousness off by reversing the spin of electrons. It's not chemical. It's happening at the quantum level. And that is a tremendous discovery with huge implications, you know. Because of this, I've seen like straight scientists, this and other factors that have emerged recently, but you know, straight scientists are talking about the universal mind all of a sudden, you know, mainstream science people saying that reincarnation and an afterlife and spirits and whatnot are no longer incongruent with scientific theory. Tremendously important, you know. So the bullet point of this presentation, I guess, is that all of these compounds, natural or not, have some kind of use in some kind of context, you know, and that's one of the problems with the free-for-all of the 1960s. You know, you need to know what to use, when, how to use it, why to use it, and how to navigate it. And all of these things are extremely different, you know. In fact, while we're on the subject, let's touch on the topic of intention, right? If you, okay, so let me back up. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to basically adapt and create new patterns physically. And neurogenesis is its ability to generate new neurons and cells and whatnot. So when you take LSD in particular, it's actually the most efficacious at inducing neuroplasticity and catalyzing neurogenesis by far. You have all these new connections being made. The thing is, according to researchers at Princeton, this I'm going to borrow their terminology. They said that psilocybin, when people learn things, it's as if it was branded into their minds. So instead of having to do it by rote and repetition, you learn something and it's just etched in there, you know? And that is largely due to these this neural explosion that's going on, right? So the problem with that is, if you have a false belief or a delusion and you believe it under the influence of psilocybin or LSD or whatever, it is going to become etched into your mind. And so, you know, that danger of developing delusions and whatnot, you know, we see a lot of people with ayahuasca that think that their ego has been reduced when in fact it's been inflated to epic proportions. The town that I live near is full of people like that. It's the overwhelming majority of them are completely out of touch with their own reality. It's actually really crazy. So, you know, the importance of preparing a person for initiation. This is how we would talk about it in the Western mysteries, right? Profit motive again. One of the reasons ayahuasca is going badly so often is profit motive. How many of you guys have heard about the importance of integration? Everyone, I'm sure. How many of you heard that you're supposed to prepare for ayahuasca for 3 years before drinking it? Oh, almost none of you? You know why that is? Of the necessity for preparation and what that really entails has taken a serious backseat due to the influence of profit motive. So in reality, to expand upon this, you know, and I got lucky in this way because I was interested in mysticism. I was interested in, you know, the occult, and I was interested in psychology and psychoanalysis and, you know, all of these different disciplines before I ever came into contact with psychedelics. So I had already really thoroughly prepared my mind to receive this ontological shock. You know, really grateful for that. But that's the reality, you know, that if you're really trying to do serious work with psychedelics, you need to know what that work is. You know, it may be a tiered thing where you have the objective first of healing your trauma, and then you want to repattern addictions that have formed as a result of that trauma. And then you want to go on a journey of self-discovery and clarification, right? And then you want to develop your ability to express yourself creatively and to have conduits to convey this personal development in a meaningful way. You know, reclaiming our sovereignty from the matrix is an absolute imperative for any person that wishes to be spiritually intact. You cannot compromise your will at all. You really can't. You have to be authentic and living in accordance with your own directives at all times. Period. End of story. And in order to get to the point where you can conduct yourself with the responsibility that that requires and with the grace and tact and, you know, you have to do a very thorough job of metaprogramming, of self-engineering. Starts with learning self-psychoanalysis, This is huge. You know, if you understand just the basics of psychoanalysis, you can do a tremendous amount of work for yourself by yourself. The problem is that a lot of people don't really have the detachment that is necessary, and damage actually causes us to sort of clutch to these aberrative personality traits even more violently than a healthy person. So it's very sticky territory, and it really depends on your predisposition going into it, whether you're a person that can objectively perform analysis on themselves. You know, so for a lot of us, working with someone that knows what they're doing is going to be essential. You know, but there are also a lot of people out there that are capable of the objectivity and detachment and can learn the techniques and apply them to themselves. And you know, if you don't have the money to pay someone, it's definitely better than nothing. You know, but you need to get really good at it, and you need to train yourself to be mindful at all times of what you're doing, why you're doing it, analyzing things. And you know, the fundamental practice is basically to, when you see some aberrative behavior, you start tracing it back. You know, this was caused by, I'll use myself as an example. I have it's better. It's not gone, I've noticed. I thought it was gone, but it's just a lot better. Self-sabotaging that I would do without fail. And it was hell, you know, because I would manage to manifest things that were like my dreams, and they were beyond any reasonable expectation. And then I would blow them up every time. And, you know, it was just the worst. So eventually, you know, I traced it back to my dad and I built a soapbox derby car, and I was winning the race. And instead of just putting on the brake to slow down at the finish line, I just jumped out of the car right before the finish line. You know, and this is after a series of, you know, going back through them all, almost like past life regression. And it is really past life stuff. But anyways, so eventually I traced it back to being like a toddler, and I wanted ice cream, and my mom was so mad that she couldn't afford to buy me like an 89-cent ice cream or whatever, that she just screamed in my face, like blood red veins bulging out, "You don't deserve ice cream." And it clicked. Like, that's it. I don't deserve these things. And so I sabotage them every time. And with that revelation, my tendency to do that to myself decreased exponentially. Like, in a lot of cases, that's all it takes, you know? So this a fundamental skill of metaprogramming, self-engineering. I'm checking with the chat again and see if you guys have popped in. What the hell was that? Something just climbed on my foot, and we have really big spiders. Thank you, Christian. If you think I'm awesome, it's awesome if you support the channel somehow. Thoughts on mescaline? Good pure mescaline available generally? If so, what culture or geographical region? Do you think there are people who would not benefit from plant medication application? What is the most? Oh yeah, there are definitely people that do not benefit from it. There are people that have inflated ego and suffer delusions. I mean, you know, the reality, they used to tell you that psychedelics would make you go insane, right? And the truth is that does not happen unless you're predisposed to mental illness. And it doesn't matter how much you take them. I'm not saying you should take them all the time. I'm just saying it's not about that. It's about whether or not you're predisposed to mental illness. So, you know, just, I guess, to succinctly answer your question, no, there definitely are people that should not take psychedelics. The problem is that in a lot of cases, people don't know they're that person until they do it. And then they still don't know because they're delusional. Ego inflation is a super common consequence of DMT and even ayahuasca. And again, it's partly due to the fact that your brain is so neuroplastic, and you know, you're hardwiring stuff in there, and you have some moment of epiphany, and you know, think you're a prophet or something, and a normal person, or a normal person would just, it would be a goofy moment, and you would think your way past it. Some people that doesn't happen; they get stuck there. This is also a very common thing that happens just in the awakening process for, especially men. You know, you realize that you are a fragment of this divine. Well, let's not even call it divine. The universal mind, right? This consciousness. You know, you are just a piece of it. And you confuse that with being the Most High God, literally, like exactly you are the Most High God. Not you're a part of it, but you are that. And, it takes months and months to work through this. It's really, really common. And in some cases, people never get out of it. That's what happened with Charles Manson. He got stuck there. So... Yeah. So the other question about mescaline, all of these compounds have different applications. There's overlap, right? And I'm sure most of you have heard me say this a million times, but I think Huxley was correct when he said that they turn a reducing valve in our nervous system down, and in the case of 5-MeO-DMT, off completely. And there's different bandwidths, right? So psilocybin, you could say, is like from 100 hertz to 500 hertz, and they're not really hertz, but you know what I mean. And then LSD is from 5 or 1,000, whatever number, you know what I mean. It's like a spectrum. And there's overlap. So mescaline has some sort of relationship with light. I mean, everything does, obviously. But as far as plant medicines go, that's the spirit of mescaline, basically, is light. It also has a masculine sort of energy, and it is very cerebral. You're just bombarded with information, and the visions tend to be also very pixelated, like little tiny segments, rather than the larger patterns of LSD or psilocybin. They are larger patterns, but they have these tiny little pixels, basically, that they're made out of. And so this relationship with the light and mescaline is really important on a lot of levels, I think. The Inca in the Andes, and other tribes of the Andes, they're very high up, close to the sun. They did not worship the sun. I don't think that's the right way to put it, but they understood what the sun was. They knew that our consciousness was radiating from it. They knew the importance of it. And so to have this cactus that has this capacity to put us in direct communication with the light itself, at this elevation with these people, maybe that's where they got the knowledge, actually, from eating the cactus. And still, it's a remarkable thing to me. A high Andean cactus that puts you into communication with the sun, basically. The first time I experienced this, I had taken a bit too much, and I was kind of blacking out, and I wandered into a unfinished house on my friend's property, and I was sitting in there, and I heard the voice of the cactus, mescalito, and suddenly I was confronted with trillions of these like little golden glowing dots that I knew to be photons, but also at the same time somehow monads, which is like an individual soul, basically a single unit of consciousness. And they were the same thing. And I realized that I could like zoom in on one with my mind and then bring it closer so I could see the details. And it was a tesseract where you can't see the whole shape at once because it has a dimension in time. So it's not that it's not completely there. It's just that you can only see the part that is in your vector, in your time vector. So, I'm not going to try to describe it. Incredibly complex, like morphing, geometrical, glowing light ball. And so then the cactus said to me, once I understood what it was, it's like, watch this. And it took one of them out. and I ceased to exist completely. It's not like things went black. It's not like it was like clear. I just didn't exist, and then I was back, and it was absolutely horrifying. And the point of it actually was supposed to be that every single constituent of the universe, down to the tiniest quark, muon, gluon, whatever, is exactly as it must be. And if so much as one of those things, a photon, were taken out of the universe, it would actually destroy the structure of the entire thing. And you might say, well, photons can be broken down into smaller particles, maybe, or, but the energy's still there. We're talking about actually removing the energy from the system. And there were a lot of other metaphysical implications of that, So at any rate, I started to realize this was universal when I had a neighbor that drank a bit too much, and I went back to check on him, and he was babbling about the billions and trillions of little they're light, they're billions and trillions, and I was like, oh my God, he's having the same vision that I did. And the San Pedro shaman that happened to be on the property for some reason walks up, and he looks at him and he looks at me, and he's like, it's a dialogue with the light, isn't it? And I was like, wow, okay. So I guess that's the best answer I can give you in terms of, like, what is mescaline, what is it for? Another interesting utility of it is that it allows you to compartmentalize your awareness, your focus on, like, I had 6 or 8 windows, because I was playing guitar, improvising, and singing, right? And at one point I realized that I had these windows, and I could devote my entire focus to my fret hand and also what it was doing in another window, and pick hand, and vocal intonation, and vocal vibrato, and all of these different things in different windows. But in each window, it was like my full concentration was on all of them. And you can actually watch a video from that night on the channel. It's a cover of Jimi Hendrix's Red House. And I don't listen to Jimi Hendrix, and I never played his music, and I don't really play blues rock even. And someone yelled out Red House, and I was like, okay, let me see if there's a backing track. And later I discovered that I was literally playing like Hendrix riffs with, the major sixth and the Mixolydian scale, or the minor pentatonic with the major six in it, and all these Hendrixisms that, on top of the fact that you can tell that I'm able to focus on all of these different things with my full attention simultaneously, because, I'm just playing ridiculously well over something that I don't even know. And that's why, I guess, is what I'm saying. So there's that. That's extremely useful. Also for lovers, it is a tremendous tool for reconnecting. It is an incredibly powerful, not only aphrodisiac, but like, enhancement. Yeah, incredibly powerful for that. You have to be aware that you have to drink it early, or you're likely to miss a night of sleep. It lasts incredibly long. Also, you have to wait 3 hours before taking another dose, unless you're really sure, because it takes super long time for it to build up to its peak. So if you're going to experiment with this, don't jump the gun. Be patient, because blackouts are very common with mescaline, and they can last a long time, so you don't want that. You also asked what cultures, where it's available. San Pedro is pretty common still throughout the Andes. Any store that you go to, or any town, is going to have stores, markets, sell huge piles of it. There are huge quantities of it for sale in Pisac. Many places that you go in South America, San Pedro is abundantly available. I used to harvest it in the wild. And this is one reason I don't understand why people are worried about it going extinct unless there's some really stupid or unethical people out there harvesting, because you don't have to kill the cactus. In fact, you can ensure that more grows just by like leaving a chunk of it on the ground when you cut it, but you don't cut the whole cactus down. You know, the cactuses oftentimes have, 100 arms, really big ones, 30 arms easily, but definitely, 8 if it's mature enough. So I guess maybe there's greedy people out there. I don't believe it, honestly, is what I'm saying. Like, I've never had trouble going out into the mountains and finding it. So, at any rate, though, you don't kill it if you harvest it properly. You just take what you need, and even if you take, I mean, I've taken a lot of cactus from a single cactus, and there was, the overwhelming majority of it still there. So, yeah, and if you want to see those cactuses, I have videos of the ancient, gigantic Malacatos San Pedro forests on the channel somewhere. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. We are still trying to raise money for surgeries. Also, there was a disaster in Ecuador today. My partner's parents their house is caught in the path of a river, and we don't know the extent of the damage. They're elderly. I know some of you guys that follow me actually live there in Vilcabamba. So if you're available to help shovel, or you know someone that has a backhoe, ideally, they really need some help. Yeah, it's a bad timing, really bad timing, and just absolutely terrible. If there's a lot of we don't know if it's gotten washed away or if it's just like a little bit of water in the basement. At any rate, well wishes for Enrica's parents. But yeah, we're demonetized. I get no support from YouTube, so rely on the community to compensate me for my time. Options to support in the chat and the Patreon. You get access to 6 years of premium material, and we're having events, and I'm offering discounts on packages right now, like a year of consultation. If you pay up front, you get 20% off, 6 months, 10% off. Did I answer the whole San Pedro question? Yeah, you do need to listen to Secret Chief's 3 Book of Horizons. It's the most incredible thing that ever happened in human history. Thank you for that information. Just curious, do you believe that time travel physically exists? And how so? If so, how is that possible by physics, and how is it accessed by humans? Well, it's a little bit off the subject of plant medicine. I think that it may be possible to do it with information. That's what physics says so far. And I think some of the experiences that I've had, the contact experiences, could be holographic, technology sent back by our future selves or something. But it seems to me that there are safeguards in the universe. For example, so that we don't know too much. If you observe a particle too closely, like the more closely you try to measure it, the more quantum fluctuations there are. And it's not like they're just distorting things. The thing becomes less knowable, So I feel like Mandela effect kind of things. I feel like if that were really true on any kind of meaningful level, we would know it already. I just can't imagine that something ridiculous and undeniable wouldn't have happened a long time ago, really. So, I'm not a big fan of conjecture. I think that we have to go into evidence, and the fact that we haven't run into any like Tyrannosauruses or time travelers that are obviously time travelers. I don't know. Couldn't answer that. But in terms of physics, there is a recent observation that there's negative time. It was a photon, I believe, or photons. I don't recall the details of the experiment, but I do remember that, the announcement from the world of physics that negative time had been confirmed to be an actual thing. So who knows? Any X for a first trip alone? I'm assuming you're asking for advice for first trip alone. Yeah, moderate. First of all, don't go overboard. You can't untake it. Once it's in there, it's in there. So, the primary thing is to take some time to dispel fear and anxiety and make sure that you are in a good place with a clear intention, that you know exactly what you're trying to get from this experience. Take much less than you think you need to at first, because, yeah, you don't want to go overboard the first time. And if you email me, I'll send you a playlist of music that I would recommend. Secret Chiefs 3, probably not for your first experience. I would save that for for like the fifth or so. But yeah, it can help to be experienced with some breathing techniques. Pranayama is really helpful. You can actually condition the mind extremely effectively just by taking a moderate dose of LSD or psilocybin and then using the fourfold breath, which is inhalation for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, exhale for a count of 4 until all of your air from the bottom of your diaphragm is completely expelled. Keep it distended for a count of 4. And while you're doing this, you think about whatever you're trying to repattern or what you're trying to retain, the change that you're trying to inculcate, on the in-breath. And while you're holding it and while you're holding your breath, the brain is being flooded with oxygen. And so the enhanced neuroplasticity and neurogenesis is being fed by the oxygen, basically. So you're like really pumping your brain full of exactly what it needs to get the job done. And then when you exhale, try to focus on the anti-corollary, the negative feelings that impede your development in this thing, or, any kind of associated negative feelings as you're exhaling and while you keep the breath distended. And then when you inhale again, there is an automatic sense of gratitude, plus you're focusing on this. So now you're building into an ecstatic state. The inundation of oxygen in the brain helps to, like I said, to repattern. But then the, what do you call it when you don't give, deprivation of oxygen accelerates your journey into altered states, higher states of consciousness. So it's really, the fourfold breath is perfect. And also in terms of numerological symbolism, the number 4 is a number of stability. So if you're a Hermetic magician in the temple, before you do any ritual, you do the LBRP and you create a circle that represents your microcosm, and then 4 points, right? That are the 4 elements, 4 directions, but these are the 4 points of stability. This is your new universe. Okay, and in all traditions all over the world, that's what's done. And so the fourfold breath is the cube for that reason, that this is the number of stability, and you're trying to create a lasting, change and transformation. So that tool and the right music, you'll be great. I also generally don't recommend, a lot of people like to go outside and walk around and look at the forest and stuff, and that's fine. You should do that eventually, but I think it's much better to take Terence McKenna's advice and close your eyes in a dark room, silence for some period, probably during the peak of it, silence, and then maybe music after the peak. Yeah, beyond that, alone for the first time, somebody might want to at least be aware of what you're doing, unless, you really feel like you're psychologically and emotionally stable, and you take it moderate, then, it's not the best thing, but it can be fine. Harley, not Harry. Anybody else have any questions or Oh, I see something. Do you recommend microdosing? If so, what are most effective plant treatments to microdose? No, not exactly. Microdosing, where you get no effect at all, research has shown that there's no difference with the placebo. And people often argue like, well, but I've experienced a change, and it's like, well, you just don't understand what placebo means if that's your response, because placebo means that you do get an effect, but it's not because of the compound. So if you increase that to like the threshold, then there's going to be efficacy. So if you take just enough and rub your fingers together, you will feel a slight change in your nerves. And so it's not necessary to take enough that you're hallucinating or that things are glowing even, but you should be able to tell that you've consumed something, maybe on the level of like caffeine or something, yeah, so that's simple. I think it's also really helpful if you take colloidal gold, which has a number of benefits in the brain: cognition, memory, mood. Basically anything that the brain has any kind of governance over, colloidal gold will improve those faculties. And of course, hericium mushrooms, lion's mane, and well, general dietary stuff like eating a lot of avocados and whatnot. But those two things in particular, the lion's mane and the colloidal gold, with microdosing, will optimize your investitures. Have you tried iboga? No, I have not tried iboga, except that there is ibogaine in sananga, and sananga is basically a jasmine. Oh, that wasn't good. And the different parts of the plants have different uses. So the flowers are used as an aphrodisiac, and the roots bark is cut off and boiled and reduced. And most people know it as eye drops, and it has a tremendous effect when you are at the peak of an ayahuasca ceremony and you take the eye drops in your eyes. Generally, the visions explode, and there's a feeling of being cleansed internally that is absolutely remarkable. And it doesn't occur the next time you do it, at least not for me or anyone that I've administered it to. It does whatever it's going to do the first time. The visions, it increases still. And I'm sure there's some element of cleansing, but not like the first time. So anyways, yeah, it has some ibogaine in it. And a while back, I met a shaman from the Matsis tribe. Shaman isn't really the right word. They don't really have shamanism. We call him a healer, curandero. And he mentioned to me that they drink sananga after having combo, that sounds rough. But I had heard about this with certain Shipibo in Iquitos when I was there. Somebody told me, yeah, the Shipibo are drinking sananga, some of them. And I was like, what? I've never heard of that. Well, it turns out that it's because the Matsis have been going to Iquitos because they found out about the industry and that they could go there and make money. So that's how the Shipibo started drinking it, because Carlos Jimenez, who comes to our retreats to administer combo, actually, his tribe is the original lineage of combo and sananga. And yeah, they drink it. So I said, can I drink it? Will you administer it to me? And he said, sure. And so I drank it, and there's a video on the channel. And it does have a slight psychoactive effect, but it's not strong, and it makes you throw up, and it burns just like it does when you put it in your eyes when you drink it. But it increases your vitality just in general. It's like just a tonic for the entire system, spiritually, physically. Yeah, so no. But I do know about iboga, and I can tell you that it is a very difficult experience. It's far more dangerous than other plant medicines, but still not that dangerous as long as you follow the rules. If you have any heroin in your system, when you take it, you'll die. So don't sneak it. And it has this miraculous capacity to completely negate withdrawal from opioids. So you have to have it completely out of your system to the point where you're starting to go into withdrawal, but then you can take a boga and you can walk right out of a 30-year heroin habit with no withdrawals, which is an absolute miracle. And it has other utilities, but I think addiction is probably the best reason to use Ibogaine. They say also that part of the way that it helps you spiritually, because whatever it's doing with the withdrawals is chemical. But they say it sends you back to your childhood when you were still pure and innocent and very vividly and clearly. And so something about that experience of integrating with your inner child, but something different than that almost, like your actual child self in the past, just snaps you out of the degeneracy, Yeah, make sure you read the lyrics to Hypostasis of the Archons. Okay, I don't see any more questions here, so in the absence of that, my main message these days has to do with the proper protocol and changing our general perception of what spirituality is, and the paradigm shift that is required has a formula, right, that will work for every individual. And here's the formula, basically. And this doesn't apply just to people in psychedelics. Any change can be affected through the application of the proper kind and degree of force through the proper medium to the proper object. If you fulfill the postulate, you will succeed at the thing. It's actually just that dirt simple. But you have to fulfill all of the prerequisites. And it's a very difficult thing to imagine achieving on the kind of scale that we need to achieve it, But we have to try. So I really honestly believe, at the risk of sounding paranoid, that a lot of our perception, the sort of cliche or standard model of spirituality and the other world kind of ideas, that your rational mind is of no service, that you must abandon critical thinking in order to navigate these murky mystical realms. And that's absolutely untrue. What is needed is for the people that are intending to expand their consciousness, to transform their being, to open their mind, to be as equally determined to enrich themselves intellectually and in earthly matters. This is called balancing the pentagram. And the ancient science of Hermeticism, the sacred science, the science of the Magi, was all about this. It was not about explaining things with superstition. When Eliphas Levi or Pythagoras or someone recognized some phenomena, even if it's something like telepathy, they were like, what is the mechanism behind this? How does it work? This kind of shift in our approach would change everything. To understand that modern history was not a mistake. Science was not a misstep. And our job now is not to abandon the last 200 years of labor and progress in favor of becoming superstitious and adopting the beliefs of some indigenous culture that is not our own just because they have them and we drank ayahuasca. And it sounds ridiculous, but it really is a very common thing, that people will do that. And it does not serve you when you go back to your modern life. It's not going to heal you either. And then when you consider that every one of these tribes has different names for all of the spirits and different beliefs about all of it, and it's like, clearly a lot of this is subjective. Which leads me to another aspect of this that's, another deeply difficult hurdle. But what I was just offering actually is a way to address this next thing. That people have embraced intellectual laziness. And it's really convenient. People will do that. This is the easy way out, and it kind of lets them feel like they're advanced as people without actually doing anything. This is the overwhelming majority of the spiritual demographic. They've taken some psychedelics or they've had an experience or something, and they just decide now that they're like this advanced spiritual entity. That's not how it works. Almost never. I mean, I do think there are some people that could be reincarnated adepts or whatever, and they come into the world pretty advanced. I'm not saying that never happens. Obviously it does. But in the majority of cases, people are just claiming a reward that they haven't earned, and there's no criteria to test them. There's no one in a hierarchy like there would be in the mysteries or even in a shamanic tradition to say, like, yes, you actually have achieved the level that you think you have. The solution, as I've been saying, is, psychoanalysis, learn it. Psychology, learn about it. Mathematics, learn it. Chemistry, learn it. Philosophy, learn it. Critical thinking, learn it. Then your spiritual development will actually amount to something, and you won't just be another muddle-headed mystic with wind blowing through your ears. We don't need any more of that. We don't need any more people making a fool of a movement, making us all look ridiculous by association. There's something has to be done about this. People need to be straightened out. One thought I've had about this, and I know I'm kind of going all over the place, and I will get back to the second point eventually. I haven't lost that, but one thing I've thought about this, what we're seeing is that this explosion in narcissism and ego inflation in the spiritual community, that often is one of the early stages of legitimate spiritual development. It happened to me to an extent. I didn't go off the deep end like I've seen a lot of other people with it, but it definitely happened. And so knowing that and knowing the microcosm, macrocosm rule, it's quite possible that this is a phase that the collective is going through just as an individual would, especially if you consider that, this became a trend around the same time. So you're going to see a lot of people that are in the same place in the process, just as a matter of, organic, it's just causal. You can see what caused it, how it happened. Yeah, and that's probably true to a large extent. At least I really hope so. The thing is, this has been about 10 years, and it just seems to be getting worse. So hopefully we're reaching like the apex of this process, and then it'll come into homeostasis again. You know what? I really actually did forget what the second aspect of this thing that I was talking about was going to be. Let me check them in the chat and see if there's any questions. It's awfully late here. What are you drinking? Also, any info I should have on San Pedro before taking it? Yes. Hypostasis of the Archons is the name of that. Yeah, there's definitely things that you need to know. By the way, you guys, for those of you just jumping in, this is AMA. Probably go for another half hour or so. I was going to do this for hours, but it was 10 o'clock when I started, and I can tell I'm going to get tired. It's coca tea, and this is coca paste beside me because I need some support tonight. Speaking of coca, coca is extremely helpful with San Pedro. Most traditions, they have coca for ceremony, and the reason is that especially at high doses, San Pedro causes a lot of blackouts, and because the duration of San Pedro is so long, the blackouts can be bad and they can go on for a long time. And your body's still running around doing stuff, and you have no relationship with that. So that's something to be acutely aware of. That you know you need to be careful with the dosage, and also remember that it takes a long time for it to reach its peak, 3 hours. So you don't want to redose too soon. I've made that mistake in the early days. And the coca will really help you to focus your mind. By the way, some of these things you can email me about, and then you know that they're legit. I don't want to say a lot because I don't know how the algorithm feels about it, but there's that. So, anyways, yeah, coca will really help you to maintain your focus and to stay aware. If it does start to get weird and you have access to coca, chew it and it'll straighten your mind out. Also, tobacco. Tobacco is for that exact thing, and in the Swar tradition in which I learned ayahuasca, we take mapacho tobacco, which is Nicotiana rustica, and it is 16 times as much nicotine as commercial tobacco, but it also has harmala alkaloids in it, which are the alkaloids that are in ayahuasca. Not a lot, not so much that you're going to have like an ayahuasca type experience. But you basically just cover it with water, just a little bit more than covered, pushed into the pan, and then boil it for just a few minutes, let it sit overnight, and then you put it in your hand and you take it through the nostrils. And you have to get it into both nostrils and try not to spill it because it represents your will. And so our consciousness, like think of it as focusing a laser. In order for your will to exert an influence on the world, it must be focused. And the tobacco just slams your consciousness into focus. It can also help if you need to vomit and you can't, you're stuck, it'll help you to purge. It also, you sometimes will take it when there's a huge revelation and you want to make sure you retain it. This will help. It's almost like a snapshot, like taking a picture of this experience and retaining it. Also, we use it at the end of ceremony. So in the beginning to set the intention, in the middle for either of the reasons I described, you're getting lost or confused or you need to remember something. And then at the end, in order to make sure you retain the experiences of the night. So that's an extremely helpful tool as well. Beyond that, you just always have to remember that no two cactuses are the same, even in the same species. The potency can vary wildly, like 10x. Go easy. Give yourself plenty of time because it lasts sometimes 24 hours, 18 hours. Large doses I had keep me up one time for almost 3 days. We couldn't sleep, neither one of us. The client and I, that he wanted to go deep, so we went deep, but we didn't sleep for a long time. Be very careful with the dosage. Remember, it takes a long time to peak, and start plenty early in case you need to redose because you have to wait, at least 2 hours. Unless you're really sure that it's like going to be weak, and that you can probably tell in an hour and a half or something. But best, especially if you're inexperienced, just wait the full 3 hours. Yeah, I mean, he's asked, doesn't it seem like humanity is going through a spiritual awakening of some sort? Or, yeah, I absolutely do, but I have to pee really bad, so I'll be back in 10 seconds. life is a spiritual awakening all the time. It always has been. You know, people say there are no atheists on their deathbed. There's my clip. Sorry, I'll find it later. But yeah, particularly in this moment, we're definitely experiencing a tremendous awakening. Now, why do you think the division bell is ringing so hard? You know, the old paradigm is gone, and that means the overlords completely lose control. You know, they're done. There's no, even just with like a super highly intelligent AI, if you're trying to figure out what the best economic and political systems are, it'll tell you. You know, and it's indisputable. Once it reaches a certain IQ threshold, there's no doubt, you know, when it gives an answer that is true. And that's something to consider as well, that all this philosophical debate and people arguing about, you know, what the best system is, and the reality is that is easily discernible, and it's been known forever. And the only reason we're still arguing about communism and socialism and capitalism and all this crap is because that's what serves the interests of the elite. In fact, you know, outside of the United States, if you look at the 10 countries that have the highest metric in happiness, healthcare, and education, 7 out of 10 of them have the same socio-political, economic thing going on, like more or less the same. So, you know what I mean? Like, it's all engineered, you know, all this conflict and confusion. And the reason they're stepping it up so much right now is that psychedelics have become so commonplace. You know, the use of psychedelics is just normal almost now. It's getting legalized even in a lot of states and counties and stuff in the U.S. And then also, more importantly, there is a paradigm shift happening in science that completely overturns the tables and cuts all the cables. Like really. Non-neural cognition, right? So plants have memory. They can count, some of them. By the way, vegans, there are plenty of plants that are far more sentient than cows. So you guys are kind of out of luck on your position that you're like not harming something sentient. When that's over, you can forget about it. Cows don't count. They don't send medicine to their relatives, and trees actually will prioritize their relatives and send them minerals and, you know, microorganisms and stuff in exactly the right composition to help their sick relative. And they have no neurons, so that's where I'm going with that. And even complex problem solving in slime molds, you know, out engineering humans with computers. And then we have the observation that consciousness is actually turned off at the level of the electron by anesthetics, which means it's a quantum process. And we have observed entangled photons emerging from neurons. And that suggests that entanglement has something to do with our consciousness, which means that all thoughts are connected throughout the entire universe and instantly, right? There are morphological phenomena occurring that are response-driven and that the organism that they apply to could not possibly understand. So a tree in Africa, for example, has stopped making whatever it is that's getting it cut down to the point of extinction. I don't know what it is, if it's a smell or, you know, what, or a color, you know, some dye in the wood or something, some, not dye, but what is the word for those, tannins. And that implies that there is some sort of intelligence with oversight in the evolutionary process that understands why people are killing these things and is changing their morphology. It's happening with elephants, rattlesnakes, and this tree and a bunch of other stuff. So, you know, the evidence now that there is some sort of universal mind, that there's teleology in nature and all of this is undisputable. You know, Michael Levin's work too, you know, and I know I'm always pointing to the same stuff here when I mention this, but these are the things that matter. You know, it destroys the old paradigm completely. And the thing is, there's something about this more holistic awareness of the universe that changes a person in a very specific way, right? And this is kind of what I was getting at earlier about how just taking psychedelics isn't enough, and you need to actually study the world around you and whatnot in depth, because that is what really causes the emergence of a truly higher consciousness and higher awareness. It's not just meditating, and it's not just taking psychedelics, and it's not just studying the sciences. You do all these things at once. And so one of the problems that we have, and the reason people aren't really noticing this so much, aside from deliberate distraction and oppression, right, of the information, is just the fact that even the scientists that are involved with this paradigm shifting research have tunnel vision to an extent. You know, when you study something to the degree that you're like Roger Penrose with physics, you are highly specialized, and you really can't think about much else or spend any time, you know what I mean? So we have these guys with tunnel vision. So I've recently seen like Stuart Hameroff, who is the person that realized that consciousness was being turned off at the level of quantum process. He didn't know about Michael Levin. You know, Michael Levin's research, some of the most relevant stuff, is 13 fucking years old. And this is a guy that should know. He doesn't. It was clear from watching the interview. He does not know about Levin's research. I watched another interview with a physicist earlier today that's like super renowned. He smoked 5-MeO DMT. And the words universal mind came out of his mouth. And I was like, whoa, what? But he started saying that AI could not become conscious. And it's like, okay, well, do you not realize that consciousness is probably arises from quantum processes? And if so, then quantum AI almost definitely will be conscious as soon as they turn it on, like Willow, you know, from the word go, it will be conscious. You know, clearly he has not like given this any thought or seen the evidence or something, because he, you know, if he knew that, I'm sure he wouldn't have said that. There's tons of this. You know, Levin, I've heard say things that tell me that he's not aware of Stuart Hameroff's research. So even among the enlightened scientists or whatever, there's this tunnel vision that's causing all of these things taken together say something much larger than the individual. The sum is much greater than the parts, kind of thing. So extremely problematic, this tunnel vision. And this is why, by the way, earlier I was talking about in the shamanic tradition of the mysteries, people were required to be polymaths. So this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen. You know? But yeah, I'm sure you guys can see what I'm getting at. And listen to this. All of this shit is happening in the context of the increasing solar storms. This is the peak of an 11-year cycle. 11 is the number of magical expansion. Real magic is just about consciousness expansion. It's not about spells. It's not about willing to have something unnaturally or whatever. It's about expanding your consciousness, developing your knowledge, being aware of your true will, and inculcating yourself with the knowledge of the holy guardian angel or the higher self or whatever word you want to use, right? So, you know, all of this stuff happening while these solar storms are occurring, and they're going to peak in June. So we have, 4 months? Of course, June 6th, the solar number, you know, 6 month. I realized the other day that I made a video about the solar storms. I didn't do it on purpose, but it was 6/24/24, which is 666. Pretty funny. By the way, I have a mushroom video coming out soon on boletes. There are hallucinogenic boletes. There are deadly boletes. There are edible boletes. Super interesting, great for your brain. I'm doing an entire series on benefits of colloidal gold and, you know, different types of mushrooms, anything that can build cognition, enhance intuition. So keep an eye out for that, because shuru is an amazing superfood that you probably haven't heard of. Watch my Andean superfood video if you want to learn about that. And even if you don't think you do, you probably do. Oh, blackout. Can I elaborate on blacking out? Yeah.
Christoph Koch? No. Oh, tell us about USA as an expat now. Oh man, it'll piss people off. What percentage of native people in Peru take plant medicine as prescribed by? Not many. Not many, really. And the indigenous cultures, so you got to understand this. This whole thing of giving people medicine to heal them is not shamanism. It's not. The shaman drank it, and then he observed the patient and looked at their energetic grid and stuff, and looped with their subconscious. The shaman drank the ayahuasca. This patient didn't drink anything. It's just profit motive. It's not really traditional almost anywhere. There are a few tribes that had every once in a while like ceremonies for the whole village, but in most cases the shaman drank it and no one else did. So no one takes plant medicine here because that's not traditional. The shaman does that. Everyone else doesn't, and that's part of the point I was making earlier about how things have kind of gone off the rail, because I don't really think that every person is really, I hate to sound elitist or condescending, but I don't think every person is really find a polite word for me, not, and I would even go so far as to say most people, which may be changing as as we're evolving very rapidly all of a sudden, I think that, but again, the context and the preparation and everything isn't what it should be. So, it's not supposed to be that way. You don't just give ayahuasca to whoever comes along and pays you. That's why we do interviews with people, but also I tend to communicate with people a lot before they come. It's the best I can do. I mean, it's a lot more than any other person that hosts retreats that I'm aware of does. But yeah, if I don't think that it's something that you should be doing, then you're not coming, it's nothing personal, but, and I'm lucky too, because we don't advertise outside of the channel. So we get like-minded people that there's a much higher chance that they're like-minded and that they have, the same kind of methodology in their madness. So, yeah. And then I saw a couple other questions. Let me look back in here and see. Okay, so he asked about blackouts and mescaline. I mean exactly what I said. Like, you don't know what is going on around you. Your body is running around saying shit, and your conscious mind doesn't know what it's doing. I don't know how else to put it. You have no conscious awareness, and yet you're still doing stuff, and it can be dangerous. So, it's just, that's why you have to be careful with San Pedro. I thought I saw some other questions, but I'm not seeing them now. The traditional reason for the maze-like patterns on ayahuasca gowns there's multiple levels to that, actually. Oh, knowledge of 5-MeO. Yeah, we'll do that next. They're icaros, if you're talking about the Shipibo. But on one level, they are artistic renderings of the patterns that you see when you take the plant. But some of these patterns drawn by the Shipibo are something like sheet music almost, or you could even think of it as like a scan, what do you call QR reader, scan your phone, and I'm so technologically inept that I don't even know what they're called, but scan, beep, and it gets information. And so you drink the ayahuasca and you look at one of these things and you know the icaro, if you're initiated and able to work with the medicine on that level. So it's kind of like a score for sheet music. Can you share your experience or knowledge of 5-MeO? Yeah. 5-MeO DMT is the king of psychedelics. It is basically, earlier I referenced this reducing valve in your nervous system that adjusts your filtration system to let in more light and different spectrums of light, which, by the way, I think is part of the reason we get all this information when we take psychedelics. The light, light that we just use to look at the world around us every day has information in it. Obviously, look around you. But I think these normally invisible spectrums carry different types of information. So, when you take psychedelics, your pupils dilate because it's letting in more light and different types of light, and that light is carrying other types of information than visible information. So at any rate, 5-MeO DMT is it's the off switch for the entire filtration system. So you're in the ultimate reality, nirvana, samsara, whatever well, not samsara, sorry, nirvana, yeah. It's just absolute nothingness in a sense, and there's not even, if you take enough of it, there's not even an observer to observe anything. It is absolute, total, and complete annihilation, nothingness. And after this experience, like people that have anxiety, PTSD, and whatever kind of issues, nothing ever seems like a big deal again. Like you're not going to sweat the small stuff for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? You're done worrying about the dumb shit. So it occurs in Yopo, Huilca seeds, Adenanthera peregrina, and Calabrina, and it is in the sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, in small amounts. But by the way, Mimosa pudica is an excellent plant to take for everything, from brain health and cognition enhancement to mood and just all across the board. Incredibly good stuff for you. Don't use the roots though; they have toxins in them. But most well known is the bufo toad, Bufo alvarius, and there is no shamanic tradition around this, despite what people have told you. It's actually been totally proven, 100%, that this was done. But this shady shaman went to this tribe, I don't remember their name, and I believe in Mexico or New Mexico, and he convinced them to lie. There is no toad smoking tradition. What do you say? Not classically, but traditionally, just for the record. And do not eat bufo. You can eat 5-MeO DMT and it'll last longer, and it's a little bit different. But do not eat bufo; you will die. So you can smoke bufo, but do not eat bufo. Beyond that, I mean, you can take small amounts of it, microdoses or threshold doses, just a little puff, a little puff, little puff, little puff. And you can stay in that realm for quite some time. It's sort of similar to DMT in the onset, and at lower doses, there are some patterns and articulations, kind of hallucinations. It's actually used a lot by couples to bond and have like an aphrodisiac and to enhance sex, and I can tell you from personal experience, it definitely works, almost too well, and yeah, I mean that's really it. And you can't do it alone. I don't care what your experience level is. I mean, maybe if you've had it, a bunch of times, but the possibility of blacking out and running around, most of the time people just fall out. You lose connection with your body. You're not really in your body. You're in, the eternal white light of unity consciousness. But sometimes people get up and run around. They're out of their minds. So you have to have someone there to hold you down if necessary. Someone that can hold you down too. You have to have either a person or enough people present that they can physically restrain you if need be. Yeah, acacia does grow quite a lot. And do I know any plant medicine for weight loss? Yeah, of course I do. Coca leaves. I can't remember what it's called, man, but there's this big flat seed that grows in the jungle. It's kind of like a U, like a slight U to it, and it's like an oval, and it's a giant seed, and I don't remember what it's called. I'm sorry, but if you go to the jungle and you see these packages of these flat seeds that are oval, then use those, and it will help you. Tell us about USA as an expat. If I don't see any other questions, then I will do that, I guess. There's not enough people here now for me to really piss off a large audience. So the first thing that happens when you leave the United States is that you realize that people are like more decent than Americans, like in general, you know, like more respectful and polite and like decent and curious. Also, people aren't deranged. Like people touch my son all the time, like strange, even drunk men. I don't flinch, you know, reach out and touch his hair because it's blonde or whatever. Like just drunk guy on the street, you know, and because you know they're not weirdos. Like it just isn't like that. People touch kids all the time, but they don't touch them in those ways. They just touch them, other people's kids, you know, just walking by and just rub them on the head or whatever, you know. Try to give them a hug even. They just like, everyone likes kids, you know. There is like an evil in the United States that is just not present in most of the rest of the world. You know, it is in some places in different ways, I guess, you know, like some Islamic countries I don't really care to visit. And, you know, I mean, sure, there's other bad places, but the U.S. has lost its fucking mind, and it's been driven insane deliberately. The wedge issues that, you know, make up the bulk of political discussion are designed just to create problems, and they're unresolvable. That's why they choose them as wedge issues. There's no right or wrong answer, so they're never going to be solved. You know, there are solutions, right? And those solutions have to do with developing reason and a capacity for critical thinking, you know, and also not letting other people put words in your mouth, like, you know, the slogans of movements, like the abortion thing, my body, my choice. Well, the other side knows that as soon as there is fertilization, there's a flash of light and there is a unique DNA strand. Once you have a DNA strand in a cell in your body, that is not your body. That's another body. It's another body. It doesn't matter if it's a virus. The only thing in your body that has a different DNA strand than you is not you. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't be allowed to get abortions, but that argument is not real. And so, you know what I mean? You can't do that. You have to argue from a place of fact and truth. And that's how these wedge issues are designed, so that that's not happening, you know. And of course, the other side is making all kinds of moronic arguments as well, and that's by design, you know. So right now, what you have going on is the culmination of the right taking over the United States. They've been working on this for a long, long time. It's not really the right; it's the puppet masters behind them, but they have realized that they need to consolidate power in order to have a totalitarian state. So the division is being escalated to the point where one side, the left, will be completely annihilated. And so they're being demonized and driven out. And that is in the interest of creating one party. And because it's an instinct for people to follow the herd, because there's safety in numbers, as soon as something becomes the majority, all the rest of the sheep will run into that flock. You know, so that's what's going on. And, you know, Trump and Elon are fake heroes, of course. And Trump's assassination thing was obviously staged. It could not possibly have been real. And if you look in the 1930s, and this is common, I mean, Wikipedia, this is not conspiracy theory. Elon Musk's grandfather was one of the founders in an organization called Technocracy Incorporated. And they had the goal of ending U.S. democracy, installing a small group of basically dictators, dictator technocrats in power. Sound familiar at all? And then combining Canada, Greenland, and Panama. Sound familiar again? I mean, really, people, you know, these guys have had this plan since the 1930s. And right now, you know, Trump will probably send $5,000 checks to everyone. They'll make everyone love the party. It'll seem like, you know, everything's getting better for everyone in the world. And then once they have everybody unified under this one banner, then they're gonna drop the mallet, you know, drop the axe. So that's what the U.S. looks like to me as a outsider. And the level of brainwashing and indoctrination is crazy. It's insane. Like, to watch people's cognitive dissonance actually play out on the internet and stuff is fucking mind-boggling. I knew it was crazy, but I never would have imagined that people could be this, like, brain dead, and just because of political conditioning. You know, it's not even necessarily that they're all actually stupid. It's just that once you have inculcated this like hypocrisy and opposing viewpoints in people's being, they're not able to escape it, because once you have cognitive dissonance, if you challenge one or the other things that's causing the dissonance, the person has fight or flight. So once they have you, they pretty much got you, you know. It doesn't work on people above a certain intelligence level at all. You know, you're just totally unaffected by it. But below a certain intelligence level, there's no hope. They're done. There's toast. There's no getting out of it, and there's no communicating with them once it's ingrained. They're just done. So that's the U.S., guys. Yeah, I mean, it's too bad, man. I would have loved to return there, to play in a band or something at some point, you know, because I can't really do that here, and that's really what I live for, is performing live with bands. But I'm not going anywhere near that motherfucking place, man. Why does NN-DMT keep you immobile, but 5-MeO tends to make people flail around? I don't know that it tends to make people flail around. Most of the people that I've given it to, because I administer it, remain completely still. I only mention that because it's a possibility and it can be dangerous. So it's something you have to be aware of. So the shaman is like the designated driver. Yeah, I mean, traditionally, like I said, the rest of the tribe does not take the ayahuasca. Just the shaman does. The only exception is Toei, or Floripondia, also known as Brumansia, Devil's Trumpet, Angel's Trumpet, all sorts of names. Pretty dangerous plant. The flowers are the least dangerous part, but they have the widest profile of alkaloids. And it's used for prophetical dreaming, and I can attest that it actually works, not in the way you would think, but I had a guy standing in my room with a stick, like a professor. He was dressed like a professor, and he was explaining this Egyptian like motif thing that had sprouted out of my wall. And the next day my AI generated it exactly the same. You know, so and I didn't do that on purpose. I hadn't worked with the Peruvian plant, and I knew it was going to be stronger, so I cut the dose by a third that I take for insomnia and inflammation, which it's remarkably good for. But it still wasn't enough cut back, and so I had a trip basically. And the issue with Toei Floripondia, and also this is true of Mandrake, Deadly Nightshade, Datura, Metalloides, Stramonium, all of them. Any tropane alkaloid containing plant, basically, except for potatoes, which the leaves will cause lycanthropy, which is where you sleepwalk at night and think you're a werewolf. And that's where the werewolf legend comes from. The potato famine, they ate the leaves, they were boiling the leaves, and people were going to sleep and jumping up out of bed and howling like wolves and running around trying to bite people and stuff, probably. It's called lycanthropy. It's a real thing. But they don't have any of the toxic alkaloids, just whatever causes lycanthropy. But so in that case, the shaman would give it to the patient, because the spirits of that plant are said to be very impish, and they're good and bad. And you are highly suggestive when you take scopolamine. That's why the prostitutes in Colombia will blow it in your face and stuff, and then you'll go back to your apartment and give them your whole life savings. It makes you highly suggestive. So these spirits tell you to do stupid shit, you're going to do it. And one of the things they like to tell people to do is to drink a glass of sand, because you're so dehydrated that you'll like choke to death and die. So the shaman doesn't drink it, because somebody has to be not under the influence of these spirits, and it's given to the patient. In a lot of cases, in most cases, it was done because there are no opium poppies in South America. So I knew of a kid that fell out of a tree, broke his back, and they just put him in a Brumansia coma, and then they would wake him up. The shaman would wake him up and say, give him a different plant, antidote, wake him up, and are you still in pain? Ah! And he'd put him right back out, and then, just not resuscitate him until he was out of pain. And you might be thinking, how can you survive that? Well, it's almost like cryogenesis. There is the zombie phenomenon in Haiti, where people are given a mixture of pufferfish venom and Datura metalloides and some other things, and they appear to be dead. And so when they're buried, the witch doctor that poisoned them waits 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 10 days, up to 10 days supposedly. And when they resuscitate you, you have varying levels of brain damage from this. So they make zombie slaves this way. That's what a real zombie is. But apparently, if you use just Brumansia, you will not have the brain damage. It's from the puffer fish and other components that are in the zombie formula. I don't think really that the Egyptian beliefs were exactly animism, and I don't think they really quite exactly worship scarab beetles. There's a certain kind of reverence for creatures and phenomena that convey deep, profound knowledge of the universe. So sun worship in most cases wasn't really groveling on the ground and thinking the sun was God exactly. They knew that light and consciousness came from the sun. They know that gold came from the sun. You know, the Inca called it the sweat of Inti, the sun god, and indeed, most of the gold on this planet came from a collision of neutron stars. So, you know, it was that kind of thing. And the mystery traditions probably started in Syria or Babylonia, and probably before they were called that even, you know, when it was like barely modern humans. And then they developed in Egypt to their like highest form. And in the beginning, they were only taught to the rulers, and they leaked somehow. And the rulers realized that illuminated people cannot be governed and won't tolerate it, so they banned the mysteries. And anyways, that's a story I've told a million times in other videos, and we don't need to get into the whole thing right now. But it basically is this shamanic way of viewing the world. You know, the hermetic knowledge, the knowledge that the universe is a book of allegory, and that the real scripture is written large upon the land for those who have eyes to see it. But the lips of wisdom are closed but to the ears of understanding. And so that's how it goes. But yeah, I think it's not it's more like panpsychism than animism really, which is, you know, close to the same thing. But that's what we're seeing emerge in science right now is recognition that that was correct, you know, and that to me is what psychedelic experiences should be engineered around, and it's not that way right now. In a lot of cases, you know, this is the most common revelation that people have in some form for sure, but the new age kind of beliefs in pop culture, lazy anti-intellectual spirituality, and human nature are pretty much, you know, completely derailing the potential that plant medicine has in particular, because we have that kind of person kind of running the show to an extent. You know, the gatekeepers, we call them, the retreat owners that they can ship the shaman in, they can pay them, you know, and when someone like me tries to even talk to them, they step in between and say, well, yeah, you can do that for $6,666 or whatever. $6,660, she said. You know, it's not optimal. Hey, daughter of Odin. Um, Johnny said something about how we can read from Sumerian texts, like Ishtar's descent into the underworld is basically the basis for Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, Labyrinth. Except that it isn't. It is and it isn't. I really think that these things are archetypal, and you don't necessarily need to have a like conduit of transmission. You know, we look for that because logically it makes sense, but that's not how this stuff works. You have the fool in every culture, you know. And you have these archetypal scenarios. You have the Trinity appearing everywhere. Even weirder, you have Mercury, the god Thoth in Greece. I mean, not Thoth. Thoth is the Egyptian one, but Mercury in Greece, the psychopomp that ferries people to the land of the dead, right? Well, Mercury in moats around Aztec sarcophagus and in Egypt as well, even though it wasn't called Mercury, it's the mercury metal, ferries people to the land of the dead. That's why they put it around the caskets. You know, that those are evidences of the universal mind, and that is the kind of stuff that we need to be paying attention to. Also, speaking of Mercury, the elemental Mercury is one proton away from being gold. So if you hit it with an electric current, you can knock a proton off and transmute it into gold. This has been done in laboratories since 1983. Mercury is the closest planet to the sun, which is the symbol for alchemical gold, and Mercury for quicksilver, which is what they called mercury back in the alchemical days. What the hell? You know? So you can't necessarily reduce things to these sort of like causal, you know, chains of causality. There's weirder shit afoot with all this stuff than that. Looking for questions and subjects. Are you on Rumble? Yeah, but they're a ripoff. They don't pay anyone. They don't pay you. They're just stealing everyone's time. Okay, does anybody have anything for me? It's been about 2 hours, and I'm seriously considering chewing some coca and playing the guitar for another 2 hours before I run out of energy. Do me a favor, though. Hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron. We get no support from Babylon. And we are really trying to level up this channel and get some real traction, and we're going to have to spend money to do that. And also, I need surgeries still. Let's see, I got this one done. I have 1, 2, 3 more to go. Yeah, so we really appreciate support. There are options to support one time in the chat, and then also in every video, PayPal, Zelle, Cash App, crypto. I don't like the mainstream social media algorithms or the alternative sites. Yeah, I know it's all connected. I really do think that, you know, yeah, it's not helpful. He who speaks the truth has few friends. You know, and that's crazy because that's an ancient, like, African proverb from a tiny little village from 1,000 years ago or longer, you know. It's crazy to think how little things change from time to time and culture to culture. Metaprogramming, guys, that is the bullet point of this presentation. You have to be willing to do the right kind of work, to add the right spice at the right time. You will rise above all the dirt and grime. But there's more to it than our pop culture standard model would have you believe, you know. The perception that a lot of people have that you just like wake up and then all of a sudden you can channel angels and talk to aliens, and, you know, I mean, I'm being a little bit sarcastic here, but that's not how this really works, you know. If you wanted to get to the point where you really were capable of doing that and having the discernment required to navigate territory like that, you're going to spend years and years and years and years and years training yourself and studying and reading, and, you know, the adepts of old, mathematics, philosophy, geometry, psychedelics, meditation, ordeals that would scare people all the way to death sometimes. You know, this is like more consistent with what we need to commit to develop ourselves in time and to the extent that is necessary for us to overcome our adversaries. You know, think about when we think about trying to take on the matrix and like the difficulty of it, most people just, you know, they're just, oh, well, we can't, you know, what are we going to do? Well, how about you try to maximize your potential and elevate yourself to fucking sovereign godhood and then see what's up? You know, how about if a bunch of us do that all at once, knowing that all the progress I make is going to pull you. We're pulling each other here. Entrainment and entanglement. Our consciousness is connected. Our oscillating brainwaves are connected. You cannot do any work on yourself that isn't going to affect the entire universe, and that's a fact. And it may be subtle, but the more of us that are doing it, the more of a magnetic pull there is, and the greater the velocity. You know, set your controls for the heart of the sun, or don't. Be a punk ass if you want. Have you found connection with your life purpose? Well, of course, man. I've known what my life purpose was since I was a child. Advice on how to find one's purpose. What's a normal day in your life like? There is no normal day in my life. There's never been one. I don't know. It depends. You know, lately I've been struggling a bit with the health issues and whatnot. So I've been like, I think I was getting depressed and didn't really notice it. You know, because we had climbed up and we were like upper middle class lifestyle after years of struggle, and then just hit a fucking wall, and it was exhausting. You know, so I was kind of like almost in shock or something for a month and a half. But I don't know. I mean, I might get up, and usually my partner brings me coffee while I'm still in bed every morning. She's an absolute doll. And then bacon and eggs and toast. And then we might go to ruins or hike around in the forest around our property. There's alpacas around. All our neighbors are Quechua. A lot of them don't speak Spanish. We have a maloca in the backyard for ceremony. There's a river in the property. By the way, you guys can come visit. We have openings for really any time now before the surgeries or within a few days after the surgeries, you know, so basically between now and March in Sacred Valley and May in Manu in the jungle. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I play guitar all night, a lot of times, almost till the sun comes up. And sometimes I take medicine, sometimes I don't. And I study a lot about physics and neuroscience and mathematics, and yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm chewing through science and psychedelics all the time, and music basically, and then outdoors, you know. And then I have a family, you know, and we go and they run around with me and get up to all kinds of lunacy. There was another question, though, I saw. Let me see if I can find that again. Have you found... Oh, yeah, how do you find your life purpose? That is something that I'm almost not qualified to answer in a way, because I hate that I didn't have to do that and I have to talk about it, you know? And I'm not saying I'm not qualified to do that, because that's actually what I do for a living, really. But it just occurred to me that I never had to really do it. So, and I tend to not talk about things that I haven't experienced, you know. It's just ironic that the one exception is the main thing that I do. You know, so like I came out of the womb obsessed with metaphysics. I kind of knew where everything was, like what, you know, before I knew what psychedelics were, the first time I heard my mom say LSD, I sat up in bed. I was like 6 or 7, you know, and I'm like, that's important. You know, like to that extent, like the first time I heard the word Gnostic, I like went out on the porch and I was like, oh, like I'm a Gnostic. I don't know what it is, but I know it's true. You know, my first girlfriend named my wand Hermes. You know, she was like a 12-year-old trailer park girl. I didn't know who the fuck Hermes was. I was 11, the number magical expansion. You know what I mean? Like, it's been spelled out for me explicitly, literally explicitly in that case, throughout my entire life. You know, it's never something I've had to think about. Light bearer, you know. But determining it for yourself is a process that involves first deprogramming, debugging. You got to debug the software. You have to isolate and destroy, or identify and destroy, all of your unnatural influences. Like if your parents imposed political beliefs on you, if your geographical, you know, luck dealt you a hand where you have a lot of political indoctrination or religious indoctrination, the first thing is to just get rid of all of it. And the process for doing that, I don't have time to totally, lay out on the table right now, but just an overview, that's the first thing, the trauma, and then the provisional programming, the, cultural, religious, familial programming that isn't you. And then you have to develop detachment and objectivity. You have to be able to be honest with yourself, because you might fancy yourself a musician when you're really an accountant, and and then you're going to try to become a musician and you're just going to fail at it, or vice versa. So you have to develop objectivity and a sort of detachment in order to really analyze yourself, and then you have to assess all of your proclivities, see what are you good at. The thing is, in this process of dissolving your programming, usually it'll just formulate itself. It's already there, You're born with it. Your fundamental essence is your true will, So once you get all of the dissonance and interference patterns out and bring everything else into homeostasis, you'll just do your true will automatically, and there'll be no question about what it is. So that's the short answer. Thoughts on daily cannabis smoking? Bad idea. I don't smoke pot at all. Yeah, I mean, any habitual use of anything is not good. I mean, it's a simple rule that poison is medicine in small quantities. Medicine is poison in large quantities. Cannabis, I mean, what is it really doing for you? One of the things I noticed about pot, because I used to be a huge pot grower, and I was surrounded by people. Like, my bass player would like roll these like donkey dongs, pile of them for the day. He's been doing that since he was 12, and his mind is a 12-year-old. He's 40, but he has the mind of a 12 or 13-year-old, seriously. And that's not probably the only reason, but I think it's got a lot to do with it. And then also, potheads are the most delusional people on earth. Like, they are convinced that they don't have any of the characteristics that are associated with pot abuse, and they do, but they're convinced they don't have any of them. And they're like literally in the middle of doing the pothead shit while they're denying that they do it. And I think it facilitates that, It can be helpful, it can be helpful. I'm not saying I would never smoke it. I would, it depends on the context. If I was at the beach or something walking along, it's a nice night, somebody hands me a good joint of some really good weed, then I might take a puff or two. But doing anything habitually is a bad idea. It basically pickles the brain. Like, it doesn't kill your brain cells, but it puts them in a frozen state where they're sort of neutralized. And then if you stop smoking, they do recover, like it wears off. But, what I'm after is enhanced cognition. And marijuana generally tends to have the opposite effect. So I don't really have any space for it in my world. All right, guys, I feel like it's been 2.5 hours, and I need to do other stuff now. Plus, I have to pee really bad. And tomorrow, I'm doing a long music marathon. The other day, I rewatched one of my streams, and Death Don't Have No Mercy featured easily some of my best playing ever. I was really surprised. I wasn't expecting that, because my experience while I'm doing it has nothing to do with whether it's good or not. I can think I'm slaying it, and I watch it, and it's embarrassing. Or I think I'm failing, and I watch it, and I'm blown away. Like, there's no correlation between what I think is happening and what's actually happening. So, long story short, consider joining me for that tomorrow night. I'm going to play all kinds of stuff for many, many hours in an effort to raise money for the channel and to raise money for my surgeries and to change the motherfucking world before it's too motherfucking late. And it just might be. So... I appreciate all you guys tremendously. I hope this was beneficial for you in many, many ways. And I will see you tomorrow night. Please hit the like button, share, subscribe, and consider becoming a patron. Good night.